The Rise and Fall of the British Empire, a regular guy's take on how it all went down. Hey folks, today, I want to chat about something pretty wild: the British Empire. You've probably heard the phrase "the sun never sets on the British Empire," right? It's one of those lines that sounds cool and sticks with you. At its peak, this empire was the biggest the world had ever seen, stretching across continents and oceans. Brits back then were super proud of that fact, and honestly, who wouldn't be? But empires don't last forever, and Britain's story is full of ups, downs, and a whole lot of drama. I got curious about how it grew so huge and then started crumbling, so I dug into it. Let's walk through it together, step by step, like we're just hanging out and talking it over. How it all kicked off: Britain starts grabbing land. Imagine this, it's way back in 1282. And a guy named William the Conqueror, that William from 1066 who took over England, decides he's not done yet. His descendant, still flexing that royal muscle, takes over Wales and tacks it onto England. It's not like Wales had a say, they just got swallowed up. That's the first big move I want to talk about. It's wild to think how one king's power trip set the stage for centuries of expansion. England wasn't a global giant yet, but you can see the wheels turning. They're starting to think, hey, why stop here? Fast forward to 1707, and things get even bigger. England and Scotland sign this thing called the Act of Union, basically a fancy marriage certificate for two countries. Boom, they're now the Kingdom of Great Britain. I picture it like two neighbors who've been bickering forever finally deciding to team up and share the backyard. It wasn't all smooth sailing. Scotland had its own vibe, and plenty of folks weren't thrilled, but it stuck. This was a huge moment because it turned Britain into a stronger, united player on the world stage. I mean, think about it. Two countries joining forces is like doubling your squad overnight. The empire goes global. Wars and new territories now. Let's jump to 1763. Britain's been slugging it out in the 7 Years' War. Think of it as a massive bar fight with France, Spain, and a bunch of other countries. Britain comes out on top, and as part of the winnings, they snag Canada from the French. That's a whole chunk of North America in their pocket. I can't help but wonder what it felt like for regular people back then. Did they even know where Canada was, or were they just cheering because their king said it was a big deal? Either way, this one made Britain a serious heavyweight. Then, in 1801, they rope in Ireland with another Union Act, and now it's the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. I've got mixed feelings about this one. On one hand, it's impressive how they kept stacking up territories like a kid collecting baseball cards. On the other, Ireland didn't exactly sign up willingly. There was a lot of tension, and that's putting it mildly. It's like inviting someone to your party and then locking the door so they can't leave. This new United Kingdom was huge, but you can already see cracks forming. By 1828, Britain's feeling pretty bold and claims the western part of Australia. They'd already been poking around down under, but now they're like, yep, the whole continent's ours. I've always found Australia's story fascinating. It's this giant, rugged place, and Britain just plants a flag and calls it home. They start sending settlers and, convicts too, turning it into a proper colony. It's mind-blowing how far they're reaching now, halfway around the world. More land, more problems. Falklands, India, and beyond. In 1833, they grabbed the Falkland Islands, a tiny speck in the South Atlantic. Doesn't sound like much, right? But fast forward to 1982, and those islands spark a full-on war with Argentina. The Falklands War was nuts, ships sinking, soldiers fighting over these windy rocks, all because Britain wouldn't let go. Argentina still claims them today. And I get it, if someone took a piece of your backyard, you'd be mad too. It's a reminder that even the smallest bits of the empire could cause big headaches later. Then there's India in 1858. Britain had been messing around there for years through the East India Company, basically a megacorporation with its own army. But after a massive rebellion in 1857 called the Sepoy Mutiny, the British government steps in with the Government of India Act and takes direct control. India was the crown jewel of the empire: spices, tea, cotton, you name it. I can't imagine what it was like for Indians, having their whole country run by foreigners. The Brits saw it as civilizing the place, but let's be real, it was about power and money. That takeover shaped India and Britain for generations. The empire's peak, the sun never sets. By the late 1800s, the British Empire is massive. They've got Canada, Australia, India, chunks of Africa, the Caribbean. You can't spin a globe without hitting British territory. People loved that sun never sets line because it was true with colonies all over. It was always daytime somewhere in the empire. I think it's pretty cool how they pulled that off, logistically speaking, ships sailing, telegraphs buzzing, governors bossing everyone around. But it's also kind of heavy when you realize how much of that came from stomping on other people's turf. King George VI, who was around in the mid-20th century, had this idea that the empire could evolve. He said something like, "We're moving toward autonomy and independence, a commonwealth of nations tied to the crown but free to do their own thing. It's a nice thought, less rule the world, more let's be a big family." But by then, the cracks were too big to ignore. The empire was starting to wobble. The beginning of the end. Ireland breaks away. Let's hit 1922. Ireland's been part of the UK for over a century, but it's been a rough ride. Rebellions, famines, you name it. Finally, 6 counties in the south say, "We're out," and form the Irish Free State, later just Ireland. The northern bit, Northern Ireland, stays with Britain, and that split's still messy today. I've always thought Ireland's story is a gut punch, centuries of struggle, and they finally get some freedom, but not without a fight. It's the first big domino to fall for the empire. Independence spreads, the Commonwealth takes shape. By 1931, Britain's loosening the reins. The Statute of Westminster gives Canada, Australia, and a few others more independence. They're still tied to the crown, but they're running their own show. I like thinking of it as Britain saying, "Okay, kids, you're grown up now, call us if you need us." It's the start of this Commonwealth idea, less empire, more club. Tony Benn, a British politician, once quipped, "The only colony left is Britain, and we've got to free ourselves." He's got a point. By this time, Britain's holding on to the past more than anything else. Then, in 1947, India says goodbye. After years of protests, think Gandhi, and all that, Britain lets go. It's a massive deal. India was the heart of the empire. Losing it hurt, economically and emotionally. I read somewhere that Britain's trade took a hit, and their global clout shrank fast. It's like losing your star player right before the playoffs. The final cuts, Canada, and beyond. In 1982, Canada gets the last strings cut with the Canada Act. They'd been pretty independent since 1931, but this makes it official: no more legal ties to Britain's parliament. It's a quiet end to a long relationship. I find it kind of poetic. Canada's this huge, chill country, and Britain's like, "All right, you're good." By now, the empire's basically a memory. What it all means, a historian's take, and my thoughts. Historian Tony Beaver once said, "Love it or hate it, the empire made us who we are. It shaped our identity." A country that doesn't get its own history won't respect anyone else's. I vibe with that. Britain's past is messy: conquest, slavery, exploitation, but it's also railways, tea, and Shakespeare going global. I'm no expert, but I think it's worth looking at the whole picture. The empire built modern Britain, for better or worse. Me. I'm just a guy who got curious. Growing up, I'd hear about Britain's glory days and wonder how they pulled it off. Now I see it's a story of ambition, luck, and eventually letting go. Economically, the empire fueled Britain's rise. Think Industrial Revolution, cash from colonies, but losing it forced them to rethink everything. Today, the UK's still a player, but it's not calling the shots like it used to. Digging deeper, history, money, and what's next? Let's stretch this out with some extra juice. The empire's rise wasn't random. It tied into Europe's scramble for power. The 1700s and 1800s were all about colonies. Spain had South America, France had Africa, and Britain said, "We'll take everything else." The 7 Years' War. That was the UFC title fight of its day, and Britain walked away champ. Economically, colonies were gold mines: sugar from the Caribbean, gold from Africa, opium from India. Yep, they traded drugs too. It's nuts how much wealth poured in, building London into a powerhouse. But empires cost money to run: ships, soldiers, bureaucrats. By the 1900s, Britain was stretched thin. World War I and II didn't help. They drained the bank and made colonies restless. India's independence in 47 was a tipping point Britain couldn't afford to hold on anymore. I found stats online showing their GDP tanked post-empire, and they leaned hard on the US for support. Hello, Marshall Plan. What's left? The Commonwealth, 50-plus countries still linked to Britain, sort of. It's more symbolic now, like a high school reunion where everyone's moved on. The Falklands spat in '82 showed Britain still got some fight, but it's not the same. I wonder what's next. Will the UK ever chase that old glory? Doubt it. Times have changed. Wrapping up, your turn. So, that's my take on the British Empire, how it ballooned and burst. From Wales in 1282 to Canada in 1982. It's a roller coaster. I've rambled on with my thoughts, some history, and random facts. Hope you stuck with me. What do you think? Got any stories about Britain's past or how it's shaped today? Drop a line. Let's keep this convo going.